For decades, the world watched Tiranta glide across frozen, finished landscapes and win 7 Olympic medals, a career that defied everything his competitors could throw at him. And for most of that career, nobody, not his rivals, not the officials, not even his doctors, understood why he was so impossibly good. Then scientists ran his blood work. What they found rewrote the rulebook on human performance forever. Mentiranta carried a mutation in a gene called EPOR, a mutation that cranked up his red blood cell production by somewhere between 25 and 50% above normal. More red blood cells means more oxygen delivery. More oxygen means more endurance. It wasn't doping. It wasn't training harder. It was written into his DNA before he was born. The man didn't just win gold. He was genetically engineered to win gold, and nobody noticed until 1993. But here's what makes that story truly wild. Mentiranta's mutation wasn't just an advantage. It was proof that some so-called defects aren't defects at all. They're superpowers, and he is far from alone. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to walk through 15 genetic mutations and physiological anomalies that turned what doctors labeled disabilities into genuine, extraordinary abilities. We're talking about athletes who shouldn't exist by any conventional standard. We're talking about people who are immune to one of history's deadliest viruses, people whose muscles defy biology, people whose bodies thrive in environments that would kill you or me. The uncomfortable truth waiting at the end of this video? The thing we call a defect is often just an adaptation we haven't found the right environment for yet. What if there was a genetic mutation that made you completely resistant to one of humanity's deadliest viruses? Not just harder to infect, immune. Around 1% of Northern Europeans, particularly those with Scandinavian and Icelandic ancestry, carry what's known as the CCR5 delta 32 deletion. HIV doesn't just inject itself into any cell it finds. It needs a doorway. A specific protein receptor called CCR5 acts as that doorway. The CCR5 delta 32 mutation deletes that receptor entirely. No door, no entry. The virus arrives, looks for a way in, and finds a wall. Think of it like changing your lock to a design the burglar's key was never cut for. The virus is still out there. It just can't reach you. Scientists confirm this in studies of individuals repeatedly exposed to HIV who never became infected. And when they checked the genetics, that deletion kept appearing. A mutation that on paper sounds like missing equipment is actually biological armor. But this particular story doesn't stop at natural immunity. In 2007, a man named Tim Brown, later known as the Berlin patient, was living with HIV while also battling leukemia. His doctors needed to perform a bone marrow transplant to treat the cancer. They made a calculated decision. They sourced the donor marrow from someone who carried the CCR5 delta 32 mutation. The transplant worked on both fronts. The leukemia went into remission. And the HIV, the virus that had been replicating inside Tim Brown's body, simply vanished. Researchers monitored him for years. The virus didn't come back. Tim Brown became the first person in history to be functionally cured of HIV. One person's genetic quirk, their missing receptor, their apparent deficiency, became the blueprint for another person's miraculous recovery. That is the moment where the line between disability and superpower stops being a line at all. Now let's shift from immunity to raw physical power. What would happen if your body built muscle faster than any athlete alive? Without exercise, without protein shakes, without training of any kind. In 2004, German doctors examined a 4-year-old boy and found something that genuinely unsettled them. His muscles were twice as developed as you'd expect for a child his age. Not slightly above average. Double. The culprit was a mutation in the MSTN gene, which controls myostatin, the protein your body uses to tell muscles to stop growing. Think of myostatin as a biological governor on an engine. It exists to prevent your muscles from consuming so many resources that the rest of your body can't function. This boy's mutation effectively silenced that governor. His muscles received a constant green light with no brakes. The medical documentation confirmed what his body already looked like. Impossible musculature, achieved passively before kindergarten. It reads like a comic book origin story, but it happened in a real hospital, and the peer-reviewed case report is sitting in the medical literature. Here's an uncomfortable truth for every sprinter who thinks they built their speed from the track up. Your explosive power may have been decided long before your first training session. The ACTN3 gene produces a protein found in fast-twitch muscle fibers, the exact fibers that fire when you accelerate, jump, or change direction at full speed. Research shows that sprinters are significantly more likely to carry a specific version of this gene, the R allele, compared to people who live sedentary lives. The difference isn't subtle. Elite sprint athletes skew heavily toward one genetic variant, while elite endurance athletes skew toward another. One gene, one letter in your genetic code, two completely different athletic destinies. And here's the part worth sitting with. The version associated with endurance, sometimes called the X variant, would look like a deficiency in a purely explosive context. Strip that person of their marathon course and put them in the wrong sport, and their natural advantage becomes invisible. Context is everything. At 13,000 feet above sea level, the air contains the same percentage of oxygen as at sea level. What changes is the pressure, which means your lungs pull in dramatically fewer oxygen molecules with every breath. For most humans, that triggers a cascade of problems. The body panics. Red blood cell production spikes in an attempt to compensate. Blood thickens. The risk of clotting, stroke, and altitude sickness skyrockets. But Tibetan populations don't follow that script. Scientists discovered that many Tibetan people carry mutations in the EPIS1 gene, and these mutations fundamentally alter how their bodies respond to low oxygen conditions. Instead of the dangerous compensatory overreaction, their systems maintain a steady, efficient oxygen delivery. They live at altitudes that would functionally disable a lowlander, and they do it across generations, across entire communities, across thousands of years of continuous habitation. This isn't an individual anomaly. It's a population-level superpower, and it probably saved countless lives when their ancestors first moved into the mountains. Ask almost anyone what superpower they choose, and pain immunity shows up constantly. No migraines, no broken bone agony, no post-surgery suffering. Sounds perfect, right? It isn't. Researchers studying a Pakistani family in the mid-2000s documented multiple members with mutations in the SCN9A gene, mutations that completely eliminated their ability to feel pain. Not reduced sensitivity, zero. They could register temperature and pressure, but pain signals simply never arrived, and the results were devastating. Without pain as a warning system, injuries went unnoticed. Infections spread because nothing announced their presence. Bones deteriorated from undetected fractures. The family members who carry this mutation consistently experience worse health outcomes than those without it. Pain, it turns out, is one of evolution's most elegant survival tools. It's your body's emergency alert system. And when you disable it, you don't feel better. You just stop knowing when something is trying to kill you. The mutation that grants your dream superpower is actually a liability wrapped in the illusion of freedom. Your autonomic nervous system controls things that happen without your permission. Heartbeat, body temperature, immune response. The textbook definition of involuntary. Wim Hof apparently didn't read that textbook. Known as the Iceman, Hof has submerged himself in ice for extended periods, climbed Everest in shorts, and, perhaps most remarkably, demonstrated the ability to willingly suppress his immune response during controlled experiments. In a study published by a leading scientific institution, Hof and students he'd trained showed measurable voluntary control of their sympathetic nervous system, something researchers had previously classified as physiologically impossible. Now, the debate around Hof involves whether his abilities stem from refined technique or an underlying genetic predisposition that most people simply don't carry. The research hasn't definitively settled that question, but what it has confirmed is that his body does things that ours won't. Whether that's a mutation, mastery, or some combination of both. He sits at the edge of what we thought human physiology could do. When your muscles work hard, they produce lactate. And lactate buildup is what creates that burning sensation that forces you to slow down or stop. It's the biological speed limiter on human endurance. Most athletes train for years to push that threshold slightly higher. Bart Sells, a Belgian runner, appears to have been born past it. Research on cells documented a genetic variation that gives him naturally elevated lactate clearance, meaning his body processes and recycles lactate far more efficiently than a typical human's. His muscles don't fatigue the way yours or mine do under sustained effort. The metabolic bottleneck that walls off most athletes simply isn't as restrictive for him. His body handles the chemistry of exhaustion differently at a genetic level. Compare that to someone who trains equally hard but carries a different genetic profile. The ceiling just sits at a different height. This isn't effort. This isn't mindset. This is a lottery ticket written in base pairs. Sweating is how your body cools itself. Lose the ability to sweat and you overheat. That's the standard medical position on mutations affecting sweat glands. And in a temperate or tropical environment, it's accurate. But zoom out. Change the environment. Mutations in the EDA gene can reduce sweat gland density dramatically, by anywhere from half to 3/4 of what you'd typically find. In a cool or humid climate, that's a serious liability. In an arid desert environment where water is scarce and every drop of sweat is precious hydration leaving your body, that same mutation becomes something closer to an advantage. Your body loses less water passively. Your survival odds in a harsh, dry landscape go up. This is nature operating without sentimentality. There's no universal defect. There's no universal superpower. There's only a body and an environment. And whether those two things are matched, change the context and the deficiency inverts. And now we arrive at the fact that reframes everything we've discussed. We open this video by asking why we call mutations defects when some of them produce extraordinary abilities. Here's the answer hiding in plain sight. Red-green color blindness is one of the most commonly known genetic differences. A significant portion of the male population carries it, and for most of human history, it's been categorized purely as a deficit, an inability to distinguish certain color wavelengths the way most people do. But here's what that framing misses entirely. When you process fewer color channels, certain other visual tasks sharpen. People with red-green color blindness are significantly better at detecting patterns, motion, and camouflage through what researchers call a reduced color interference effect. Your visual system, freed from processing redundant color data, allocates resources differently. Military units historically recognize this. Reconnaissance roles specifically recruited individuals with color blindness because their ability to see through visual camouflage was measurably superior to full-color vision. The disability was a feature in disguise. Your so-called broken eyes were military-grade equipment all along. And that's the thread that runs through every single case in this video. Mentiranta's extra red blood cells, the CCR5 Delta 32 carrier's missing receptor, the Tibetan highlands adapted lungs. Every case starts with a label that sounds like loss and ends with a capability that sounds like impossible. We spent 15 minutes on mutations that look like damage and function like gifts. But step back far enough and the real story becomes clear. No single mutation is the superpower. The superpower is the sheer genetic diversity that lets humanity carry all of these variations simultaneously. The sprinters and the endurance runners, the high-altitude survivors and the desert-adapted, the pain-sensitive and the pain-free, the HIV immune and the muscle-bound. Evolution doesn't design for one environment or one era. It hedges, it scatters variation across populations and waits for the world to change. Then whoever is carrying the right mutation for the right moment, they survive, they thrive, they win 7 Olympic medals. We are not a species of broken individuals straining towards some perfect template. We are a species of radically, dangerously adapted variants. Each of us carrying some combination of traits that somewhere, in some environment, in some moment in history, is exactly the right tool for the job. So the next time someone calls something a defect, yours or someone else's, ask the second question, defect in which context, compared to which environment? Because the mutation you haven't found a use for yet might be the one your descendants need most.